guys, welcome back to The Giver. I hope you're enjoying it. Here's our next chapter. Lily, please hold still, Mother said again. Lily, standing in front of her, fidgeted impatiently. I can tie them myself, she complained. I always have. I know that, Mother replied, straightening the hair ribbons on the little girl's braids. But I also know that they constantly come loose, and more often than not, they're dangling down your back by afternoon. Today, at least, we want them to be neatly tied and to stay neatly in place. I don't like hair ribbons. I'm glad I only have to wear them for one more year, Lily said irritably. Next year I get my bicycle too, she said cheerfully. There are good things each year, Jonas reminded her. This year, you get to start your volunteer hours. And remember last year when you became 7 and you were so happy to get your front button jacket? The little girl nodded and looked down at herself, at the jacket with the row of large buttons that designated her as a 7. 4s, 5s, and 6s all wore jackets that fastened down the back so that they would have to help each other dress and would learn interdependence, dependence on each other. The front button jacket was the first sign of independence, the first very visible symbol of growing up. The bicycle at 9 would be a powerful emblem of moving gradually out into the community, away from the protective family unit. Lily grinned and wriggled away from her mother. And this year you get your assignment, she said to Jonas in an excited voice. I hope you get pilot. And then you take me flying. Sure I will, said Jonas, and I'll get a special little parachute that fits just you, and I'll take you up to, I don't know, maybe 20,000 feet and then open the door and... Jonas, Mother warned. I was only joking, Jonah groaned. I don't want to be a pilot anyway. If I get pilot, I'll put in an appeal. Come on, Mother said. She gave Lily's ribbons a final tug. Jonas, are you ready? I want to get a good seat in the auditorium. And she prodded Lily to the front door and Jonas followed. It was a short ride to the auditorium, Lily waving to her friends from her seat on the back of Mother's bicycle. Jonas stowed his bicycle beside Mother's and made his way through the throng to find his group. The entire community attended the ceremony each year. For the parents, it meant 2 days holiday from work. They sat together in the huge hall. Children sat with their groups until they went one by one to the stage. Father, though, would not join Mother in the audience right away. For the earliest ceremony, the naming, the nurturers brought the new children to the stage. Jonas, from his place in the balcony with the 11s, searched the auditorium for a glimpse of Father. It wasn't at all hard to spot the nurturer section in front. Coming from it were wails and howls of the new children, who sat squirming in the nurturer's laps. At every other public ceremony, the audience was silent and attentive. But once a year, they all smiled indulgently at the commotion from the little ones, waiting to receive their names and families. Jonas finally caught his father's eye and waved. Father grinned and waved back. And then he held up a hand of the new child in his lap, making it wave too. It wasn't Gabriel. Gabe was back at the nurturing center today, being cared for by the night crew. He had been given an unusual and special reprieve from the committee and granted an additional year of nurturing before his naming and placement. Father had gone before the committee with a plea on behalf of Gabriel, who had not yet gained the weight appropriate to his days of life, nor begun to sleep soundly enough at night to be placed with his family unit yet. Normally, such a new child would be labeled inadequate and would be released from the community. Instead, as a result of Father's plea, Gabriel had been labeled uncertain and been given an additional year. He would continue to be nurtured at the center and would spend his nights with Jonas's family unit. Each family member, including Lily, had been required to sign a pledge that they would not become attached to this little temporary guest, and that they would relinquish him without protest or appeal when he was assigned to his own family unit at next year's ceremony. At least, Jonas thought, after Gabriel was placed next year, they would still see him often because he would be part of the community. If he were released, they would never see him again, ever. Those who were released, even as new children, were sent elsewhere and never returned to the community. Father had not had to release a single new child this year, so Gabriel would have represented a real failure and sadness. Even Jonas, though he didn't hover over the little one the way Lily and his father did, was glad that Gabe had not been released. The first ceremony began right on time, and Jonas watched as one after another each new child was given a name and handed by the nurturers to his new family unit. For some it was a first child, but many came to the stage accompanied by another child beaming with pride to receive a little brother or sister the way Jonas had when he was about to be 5. Asher poked Jonas's arm. "Remember when we got Philippa?" he asked in a loud whisper. Jonas nodded. It had only been a year. Asher's parents had waited quite a long time before applying for a second child. Maybe, Jonas suspected, they had been so exhausted by Asher's lively foolishness that they needed a little extra time. 2 of their group, Fiona and another female named Thea, were missing temporarily, waiting for their parents to receive new children. But it was rare that there was such an age gap between children in a family unit. When her father's ceremony was completed, Fiona took the seat that had been saved for her in the row ahead of Asher and Jonas. She turned and whispered to them, "He's cute, but I don't like his name very much." And she made a face and giggled. Fiona's new brother had been named Bruno. It wasn't a great name, Jonas thought, like, Gabriel, for example, but it was okay. The audience applause, which was enthusiastic at each naming, rose in an exuberant swell when one parental pair, glowing with pride, took a male new child and heard him named Caleb. This new Caleb was a replacement child. Can you imagine a replacement child? The couple had lost their first Caleb, a cheerful little 4. Loss of a child was very, very rare. The community was extraordinarily safe, and each citizen watchful and protective of all the children. But somehow the first little Caleb had wandered away unnoticed and fallen into the river. The entire community had performed the ceremony of loss together, murmuring the name Caleb throughout the entire day, less and less frequently, softer in volume, as long as the somber day went on, so that the little 4 seemed to fade away gradually from everyone's consciousness. Now, at this special naming, the community performed a brief murmur of replacement ceremony, repeating the name for the first time since the loss, softly and slowly at first, then faster and faster with great volume, as the couple stood on the stage with the new child sleeping in his mother's arms. It was as if the first Caleb was returning. Another new child was given the name Roberto, and Jonas remembered that Roberta the Old had been released only last week. But there was no murmur of replacement ceremony for the new little Roberto. Release was not the same as loss. He sat politely through the ceremonies of 2 and 3 and 4, increasingly bored as he was each year, and then a break for the midday meal, served outdoors, and back again to the seats for the 5s, 6s, 7s, and finally, last of the first day's ceremonies, the 8s. Jonas watched and cheered as Lily marched proudly to the stage, became an 8, and received the identifying jacket that she would wear this year. This one with smaller buttons and, for the first time, pockets, indicating that she was mature enough to know how to keep track of her own small belongings. She stood solemnly, listening to the speech of firm instructions on responsibilities of 8, and doing volunteer hours for the first time. But Jonas could see that Lily, though she seemed attentive, was looking longingly at the row of gleaming bikes, which would be presented tomorrow morning to the 9s. Next year, Lily Billy, Jonas thought. It was an exhausting day, and even Gabriel, retrieved in his basket from the nurturing center, slept soundly that night. Finally, it was the morning of the ceremony of 12. Now, Father sat beside Mother in the audience. Jonas could see them applauding dutifully as the nines, one by one, wheeled their bicycles, each with its gleaming name tag attached to the back from the stage. He knew that his parents cringed a little, as he did when Fritz, who lived in the dwelling next door to theirs, received his bike and almost immediately bumped into the podium with it. Fritz was a very awkward child, who had been summoned from chastisement again and again, for chastisement again and again. His transgressions were small ones always: shoes on the wrong feet, schoolwork misplaced, failure to study adequately for a quiz. But each such error reflected negatively on his parents' guidance and infringed on the community's sense of order and success. Jonah and his family had not been looking forward to Fritz's bicycle, which they realized would probably too often be dropped on the front walk instead of wheeled neatly into its port. Finally, the nines were all resettled in their seats, each having wheeled a bicycle outside where it would be waiting for its owner at the end of the day. Everyone always chuckled and made small jokes when the nines rode home for the first time. "Want me to show you how to ride?" older friends would call. "I know you've never been on a bike before." Wink, wink. But invariably, the grinning nines, who in technical violation of the rule had been practicing secretly for weeks, would mount and ride off in perfect balance, training wheels never even touching the ground. Then the tens. Jonas never found the ceremony of 10 particularly interesting, only time-consuming, as each child's hair was snipped neatly into its distinguishing cut. Females lost their braids at 10, and males, too, relinquished their long, childish hair and took on the more manly short style which exposed their ears. Laborers moved quickly to the stage with brooms and swept away the mounds of discarded hair. Jonas could see the parents of the new tens stir and murmur, and he knew that this evening, in many dwellings, they would be snipping and straightening the hastily done haircuts, trimming them into a neater line. 11s. It seemed a short time ago that Jonas had undergone the ceremony of 11, but he remembered that it was not one of the more interesting ones. By 11, one was only waiting to be 12. It was simply a marking of time with no real meaningful changes. Some of the clothes were slightly different, and the boys were given pockets for the first time because they would need to use calculators in school for their 11 year. Break for midday meal. Jonas realized he was hungry. He and his group of classmates congregated by the tables in front of the auditorium and took their packaged food. Yesterday, there had been merriment at lunch, a lot of teasing and energy, but today, the group stood anxiously, separate from the other children. Jonas watched the new nines gravitate toward their waiting bicycles, each one admiring his or her name tag. He saw the tens stroking their new shortened hair, the females shaking their heads to feel the unaccustomed lightness without the heavy braids that they had worn for so long. "I heard about a guy who was absolutely certain that he was going to be assigned engineer," Asher muttered as he ate, "and instead they gave him sanitation laborer. He went out the next day and jumped into the river, swam across, and joined the next community he came to. Nobody ever saw him again." Jonas laughed. "Somebody made that story up, Ash," he said. "My father said he heard that story when he was 12. But Asher wasn't reassured. He was eyeing the river where it was visible behind the auditorium. "I can't even swim very well," he said. "My swimming instructor said that I don't have the right boyishness or something." "Buoyancy?" Jonas corrected him. "Whatever. I don't have it. I sink." "Anyway," Jonas pointed out, "have you ever once known of anyone, I mean really known for sure, Asher, not just heard a story about it, who joined another community?" "No," Asher admitted reluctantly. "But you can. It says so in the rules. If you don't fit in, you can apply for elsewhere and be released. My mother says that once, about 10 years ago, someone applied and was gone the next day." And then he chuckled. "She told me that because I was driving her crazy. She threatened to apply for elsewhere." "She was joking," said Jonas. "I know, but it was true what she said, that someone did that once. She said it really was true. Here today and gone tomorrow, never seen again, not even a ceremony of release." Jonas shrugged. It didn't worry him. How could someone not fit in? The community was so meticulously ordered, and the choices so carefully made. Even the matching of spouses was given such weighty consideration that sometimes an adult who applied to receive a spouse waited months or even years before a match was approved and announced. All the factors, disposition, energy level, intelligence, interest, had to correspond and to interact perfectly. Jonas's mother, for example, had higher intelligence than his father, but his father had a calmer disposition. They balanced each other out. Their match, which, like all matches, had been monitored by the committee of elders for 3 years before they could apply for children, had been a successful one. Like the matching of spouses and the naming of placement of new children, the assignments were scrupulously thought through by the committee of elders. He was certain that his assignment, whatever it was to be, and Asher's too, would be the right one for them. He only wished that the midday break would conclude and that the audience would re-enter the auditorium and the suspense would just be over. As if in answer to his unspoken wish, the signal came and the crowd began to move toward the doors. I cannot wait to see what Jonas gets assigned, and Asher too. Bye, guys.